Hello, Rayclast. Welcome to the Path of Exile build guide for the cast-on-cast Discharge Inquisitor. I apologize that it has been a really long time since an upload and since the first part of the video on this character. Life has been super busy, and so this is also going to be a pretty quick and informal build guide without a lot of editing and unscripted. So I'll get through this as best as I can. It's been a long time since I've played as well, so I'm kind of remembering the character as I explain it. But basically, in the background here, you see a pretty juiced armory map I'm doing. This character's got pretty okay clear speed, not amazing, not like a big whole screen blasting ranged character, but it's smooth and fast and you blow everything up. It's pretty safe and tanky. We've got capped block and spell block as long as our roomies is up, and we are using glancing blows. And we get some life recovery on block from one of the staff nodes, so that helps us stay alive pretty well. As you can see, we are using Eldritch Battery to cover our mana costs, and I'll talk about this stuff in more detail when I switch over to Path of Building. But a basic explanation of how this setup works is the Trigger Staff mod that makes it so you trigger a socketed spell whenever you use a skill that normally has a pretty long cooldown. It turns out if you use the Threshold Jewel for Discharge that says Discharge has a 250 millisecond cooldown, that actually overrides the cooldown on the trigger. So if you put Discharge in a trigger weapon and use the Threshold Jewel, you can actually trigger it by casting any other skill every approximately 250 milliseconds, rather than having to wait the full 8 or 4 second cooldown or whatever it is if you actually get the Unveil on that mod. That 250 milliseconds, important note, because PoE server ticks are every 33 milliseconds, actual cooldowns have to be multiples of 33, and it's always going to be the next one up. You're never going to get a shorter cooldown because of that. So that 250 millisecond cooldown is actually a 264 millisecond cooldown. So whatever skill you are using to trigger your discharge, in this case I'm using Blazing Salvo, that 264 millisecond cooldown translates to 3.78 casts per second. So to avoid wasting casts, you want your cast speed to be as close to that 3.78 as possible, but not exceeding it. If you exceed it, you're going to waste casts and lose a lot of damage. I have 3.77 casts per second, so I'm just 1/100th off of that theoretical perfect cast speed. So I'm getting about as many casts per second as you possibly can with Discharge. So to fuel this thing, as I mentioned, and you can see, I'm using Blazing Salvo, and we are using the Vol's Protector chest. That gives you a power charge every time you crit an enemy, and unlike a lot of other sources of that, it does work with multiple hits from a single cast against one enemy, will give you multiple power charges. And so I'm using Blazing Salvo because it's projectiles shotgun, so you can get a lot of projectiles, all critting, making sure that on every cast you refill your whole power charges for the next cast. I'm then using the Vol's Devotion Amulet, which makes it so anytime you consume a power charge, you gain an endurance charge. So basically every single cast we'll have 5 power charges and 5 endurance charges. So we are blasting off 10 charge discharges at a rate of about 3.77 casts per second, which translates into pretty good damage. The budget for this character, I can't remember at this point exactly how much I spent. It wasn't horribly expensive, but it's not like a cheap intro version either. But I think you can get it running pretty quick. All you really need is the 2 Vol's items and a trigger weapon, and you can kind of get going. But it's going to require a bit more if you want to optimize it to this level. As you can see, I have all of my mana reserved, and I'm using Eldritch Battery to power my casts. I really think that's kind of the way to go on pretty much any caster these days, because then you can just squeeze in all the R's you want on your mana pool, squeeze in an extra one using the Divine Blessing support gem on your energy shield pool, and just use your energy shield to fuel all your casts. Now, Discharge is super expensive, especially when you're casting it this fast and you're also casting a 6-link Blazing Salvo at the same time. So you're going to need quite a bit of energy shield help, and we'll look at some more of that in the Path of Building in a second here. But basically, make sure you're getting enough energy shield that you can sustain your casts, and you can just keep blasting discharges forever. And in a second here, after this clip ends, we will go into Path of Building, and I'll do a quick talk through of some of the finer points of the build. Alright, so here we are in Path of Building, and I will try to remember exactly everything that was going on with this character. It's been like a couple months since I was last playing. But first we'll go over the passive tree here. We are an Inquisitor, as mentioned. We go out through here through all the standard kind of stuff. You're needing to grab some dexterity and cast speed where you can. We want quite a bit of cast speed on this character to try and reach right up under that 3.78 casts per second. We're using a staff, so we're grabbing staff nodes, of course, as we go. Glancing blows for block, some life, armor, and stuff as well. Using a Watcher's Eye, because we are using a fast-casting, shotgunning projectile spell, life gain for enemies hit is really strong, so we're using a Vitality Watcher's Eye for a bunch of life gain on hit with that. And also using a ring with some spell life gain on hit. Since we're using Discharge, of course we need to grab charges wherever possible, so we're grabbing Endurance and Power charges here, some spell crit stuff, some more staff spell crit stuff. We're totally crit capped on both of our skills, so adjust your crit needs accordingly to how much you have on your gear and stuff so that you're not wasting points on crit where you don't need it. I'm using a cluster jewel setup here, one for some energy shield leech because we spend energy shield with Eldritch Battery really fast. This gives some spell block and spell damage, and then up here this is just some spell damage and more cast speed. And then I'm just using a couple of Fettle Jewels to boost up my life a little bit there as well. And on these small nodes you can see we also have cast speed. So basically just make sure you're tuning in your cast speed to get as close to that 3.78 as possible without going over. Grabbing life wherever we can. We don't actually pick up like any mana reservation nodes because we're just reserving our whole pool and then using Eldritch Battery. Over here is where I've stuck Endless Misery, which is the threshold jewel for Discharge to give it the shorter cooldown, and I've got a Corrupted Blood immunity on that, which is of course nice to have. And just more life and spell damage and stuff. You can see at some point here I actually unspec'd out of these spell crit nodes because I was capped without them. And these ones over here are just better. This one gives a lot more multi than this one does. So that's pretty much it for the passive tree. For our Ascendancy here, we're the Inquisitor. Of course, we're grabbing the Ignore Enemy Resistances because we're mixed element with a 2-charge discharge, 2 different types of charge discharge. And this node gives you a buttload of crit as well if you're roughly balancing your strength and intelligence. You can see mine are super close to balance over here, so this node is giving us like 317% crit. And then again, we grab the Consecrated Ground stuff up here. This gives us a lot of regen, makes enemies take extra damage, and then this one makes it so that regen also affects our energy shield, which is really important for the giant mana cost we're trying to sustain through Eldritch Battery. This is just a regular jewel. You're going for damage, cast speed, crit multi, all those things. Again, be careful with the cast speed. Make sure you're not shooting over that 3.78 casts per second. Go over here and look at the skills quick. Zealotry is what I was using on Divine Blessing here. It says we're over on unreserved mana, but that's just because it isn't working with the Divine Blessing. You can see if we turn it off, we're fine. We're actually casting that Zealotry as a temporary aura on our energy shield using the Divine Blessing and using increased duration to make that last longer, which is also linked to a Frost Shield to help it last longer as well. We don't actually need the spell crit from Frost Shield at all. I was just using it for another defensive layer so that we could absorb a little more damage while standing inside it. For Discharge, in our main weapon, it is actually a little weird to try and get good support gems for Discharge. There just really aren't a ton. I didn't want to use Elemental Overload because I was getting really nice shocks on the Discharge because it's such big damage. So we're using Vile Toxins. Vile Toxins is actually like one of the strongest support gems you can use on anything if you poison enemies. It gives 5% more damage with hits per poison on the enemy up to 9. So that is what, 45% more damage, which is more than like any other support right now. And to fuel that, I'm just using a Chance to Poison over on my Blazing Salvo, and since it's hitting so much, we are like instantly filling enemies up on that many poisons, so we're always getting full effectiveness out of that Vile Toxins. Cruelty, 24% more damage with hits. It's not great, but again, you don't have a ton of options. Using increased crit damage and Empower. I was just using a level 3 Empower. Couldn't afford a level 4 one at the time, but you could get more damage there. And then, of course, Concentrated Effect with increased AoE for clearing. For Blazing Salvo, things get a little interesting here. You want GMP so that you get more projectiles shotgunning to generate more power charges and stuff. Increase crit strikes to make sure you're capped out on that, because Blazing Salvo doesn't have a really high base crit like Discharge does. Faster casting, 2120 to get a lot of cast speed, and then using Onslaught with an alternate quality that again gives 20% increased attack and cast speed during Onslaught. Trying to get as close as possible to that 3.78 casts per second, and then as mentioned, the chance to poison so that we can fuel the vile toxins over here on Discharge. One thing you could do is you could actually go for more damage-focused links on the Blazing Salvo and sacrifice a little cast speed and sort of balance more of your damage between Discharge and Blazing Salvo. That would be totally legit as well, though you'd want to modify your itemization a little bit from what I have. Using a Molten Shell with cast when damage taken, and then of course Assassin's Mark to cast on bosses. Flame Dash just to get around quickly, and then our main things that we're actually reserving our regular mana pool with are Purity of Elements and Determination for a bunch of armor and that nice ailment immunity. Vitality just so that we can use the life gain on hit from the Watcher's Eye, and Enlighten so that all three of those can fit together without any mana reservation nodes. Over here in the items, you can see my staff here. As I mentioned, this is what you would want to change if you wanted to actually get more damage out of your Blazing Salvo. I have +3 to the level of Lightning spell skill gems. You can use Lightning, Cold, or Fire for Discharge and it'll work because it has all of those tags. But if you wanted more damage on your Blazing Salvo, you'd want to try to get one that is Fire spell skill gems. I tried for a while, but couldn't find one at a price that I could afford. So again, make sure you have your Trigger Craft here on your staff. For the helmet, you could use about anything, but Crown of the Inward Eye, basically you just want something that has that +5 to radius for Discharge, but Crown of the Inward Eye is really strong. Again, lots of life and energy shield, and it gives you quite a bit of damage through the Transfiguration mods as well. The two items that make the build work, the Vol's Protector and the Vol's Devotion, as I mentioned previously, give you your power charge generation and your endurance charge generation when combined. I've got some gloves here that I got some fire damage leeched as life on using the new orbs from the new bosses, as well as Unnerve on a hit for spells, which makes enemies take more spell damage. And notably here you'll see I have increased energy shield recharge rate, same on the boots, increased energy shield recharge rate, and I've got 40% action speed there as well, which again feeds into trying to hit that perfect cast rate. Ring 1 here, I've got +1 minimum frenzy charges, which is a little bit of damage, and of course brings us even closer to that perfect cast rate, but beyond that it's just life and resistances. My other one has some nice life gain on hit for enemies hit by your spells. Also reduce reflected damage, that wasn't anything I was going for particularly here, but if you combine that with the Pantheon, then you can run reflect maps, which is pretty nice. And then the belt is just life, chaos resistance, strength. I was trying to get some chaos resistance somewhere so that I would end up with okay resistance for chaos at the end of the day. Flasks, using a concentrated eternal life flask of Sealing that is just a lot of life over 3 seconds. I've pretty much replaced that, replaced Catalyzed with that now that they buffed the base speed on eternal life flasks. And then I'm using a Basalt Flask just for a bunch of armor, of course. And Rumi's Concoction, again more armor, and that caps out both our block and spell block, and a Diamond Flask of Incision for extra crit, and it's Doctors, so that one is up all the time because we are doing a lot of different crit strikes. Already went through the jewels on the tree, just some cluster jewels, Watcher's Eye, and the Discharge jewel. So that pretty much does it for the Path of Building. Again, a TLDR, make sure you have a trigger weapon with Discharge in it, the Discharge triggering, or the Discharge cooldown jewel, and then get your cast rate as close as possible to 3.78 casts per second without going over, and use Vol's Protector and Vol's Devotion to generate your charges. So I will just leave you with a couple of boss fight clips or something here at the end. Thank you so much for watching. Sorry this one was kind of slapdash together, but all the info you need is in the Path of Building, which will be linked in the video description. So please check that out if you're interested in this build. And hopefully I will be back and making some more content when the next league starts in a week and a half or so here. Life has just been super busy, which is why it's taken so long to get this video out. But I appreciate you guys watching and appreciate you sharing this with anyone who you think might find it interesting. So I will hopefully see you in Rayclast when the new league starts. Bye, guys.
With your death, this nightmare may finally end. I'm better. Feeding time. I awaken from... This is not a battle you can win.
I will not let the Templar's champion claim the Atlas. My champion, energize the spheres.